In the heart of Renaissance Milan, one duchess turned her castle into a world of secrets, strategy, and desire. Christina of Milan defied the expectations of her time, blending charm, intelligence, and audacity to maintain a carefully curated circle of lovers, whose loyalty was as much a matter of politics as of passion. Behind closed doors, her household operated like a finely tuned court, where every gesture, glance, and whispered word could carry meaning, and missteps had consequences. From lavish feasts and masked balls to coded messages and strategic alliances, Christina's life was a delicate balance of indulgence and control. Her story, chronicled in letters, diaries, and court records, reveals a woman who wielded power with subtlety and precision, leaving a legacy that fascinated, scandalized, and captivated all who heard of her exploits. A scandalous birth. Few noble births in Renaissance Milan carried the same whisper of scandal as that of Christina in 1507. The eldest daughter of Duke Ludovico of Milan, she entered the world during a period of intense political maneuvering. When Italian city-states jostled for dominance, alliances shifted with alarming speed, and marriages were more contracts than romantic unions. Her mother, Isabella Sforza, was a woman of sharp intellect and subtle influence, navigating court intrigue with the precision of a chess master. Christina, as contemporaries noted in letters preserved in the Archivio di Stato di Milano, exhibited an unusual mix of curiosity and determination even in childhood, often insisting on observing council meetings from behind heavy velvet curtains, much to the annoyance of ministers who preferred she remain quietly entertained with embroidery or Latin texts. From an early age, Christina displayed traits that would later define her scandalous reputation: an impatience with convention, an eye for detail, and a fascination with both power and human behavior. Her tutors, drawn from Milan's finest scholars and clerics, reported that she questioned the hierarchy of the household, challenged moral teachings that contradicted practical outcomes, and occasionally defied the strict gender expectations imposed on daughters of noble houses. One surviving diary entry of her tutor, Paolo da Cremona, records her insistence on observing the negotiation of a minor treaty with neighboring Piacenza, arguing that, to understand a duke, one must watch the dance of words before wielding a pen. Such precociousness, while remarkable, earned her the wary admiration of the court and the quiet concern of her mother. The environment Christina grew up in was one where the stakes were never small. Milan in the early 16th century faced both external pressures, from the Holy Roman Empire and France, and internal friction, as powerful families vied for influence within the ducal court. Political assassinations, secret alliances, and sudden reversals of fortune were the norm rather than the exception. It was in this atmosphere that Christina absorbed lessons in both strategy and self-preservation. Observing her father navigate threats from condottieri, rival dukes, and rebellious citizens provided her with a first-hand education in power that most noble women of her age never received. Her adolescence coincided with a period of particular tension between the Sforza family and the expanding influence of French forces in northern Italy. Letters from the time, now catalogued in Milan's Biblioteca Ambrosiana, describe her fascination with military campaigns and the role of spies, scouts, and couriers. Unlike her peers, who were expected to focus on needlework and social etiquette, Christina insisted on studying maps, understanding troop movements, and memorizing the names and ranks of visiting envoys. This unusual focus on strategy, paired with a growing awareness of her own charm and social leverage, laid the groundwork for the later scandals that would make her a household name. At the same time, Christina's early experiences revealed an acute awareness of desire and attraction, although in a controlled and observational manner. She was said to note the behavior of men who sought her mother's favor or her father's ear, cataloging their manners, motives, and weaknesses with almost scientific precision. These observations, combined with her education and access to political intelligence, would later inform her unorthodox methods of influence within her household. Despite this disciplined and analytical approach, Christina was never entirely restrained. Household records indicate she occasionally defied rigid schedules, attending feasts uninvited, or slipping into the Duke's private library to read texts forbidden to women. Such incidents, though minor at the time, foreshadowed a lifetime of challenging social norms. By the time she reached her teenage years, Christina was no longer merely the dutiful daughter of Milan. She was emerging as a figure with an unmistakable sense of personal agency, a woman capable of wielding her intellect, beauty, and audacity to carve out a space in a world dominated by men. This combination of environment, education, and innate curiosity set the stage for a life that would confound moralists, intrigue political observers, and scandalize both the Italian courts and eventually in broader Europe. Christina of Milan was not merely born into privilege. She was born into observation, calculation, and the early stirrings of ambition that would later transform her private life into one of the most notorious scandals of her time. Her story begins here, in a city alive with ambition and danger, where a young girl's intellect and curiosity hinted at the unconventional path she was destined to take. Marriage and courtly expectations. At 16, Christina of Milan faced the kind of life-altering arrangement typical for noblewomen of Renaissance Italy, an arranged marriage that promised political advantage but little personal choice. In 1523, she was wed to Count Lorenzo di Medici of Florence, a union orchestrated by her father to strengthen Milan's influence in Tuscany. Contemporary letters describe the ceremony at the ducal palace, attended by representatives of Milan, Florence, and smaller neighboring states, where every gesture, from the placement of candles to the order of procession, was meticulously planned to convey wealth, power, and social alignment. Christina, however, entered the marriage with her own sharply honed awareness of authority, intellect, and personal boundaries, qualities that would soon set her apart from the typical expectations of a countess. The life of a noblewoman in Renaissance Milan and Florence was governed by a strict framework of duties. Christina was expected to produce heirs, manage household finances, oversee servants, host social gatherings, and maintain an appearance of unassailable virtue. Diaries and account books preserved from the time, including those of her mother, Isabella Sforza, show the precise routines imposed upon daughters of the Sforza line: daily prayers at dawn, structured reading hours, supervised excursions into gardens, and carefully monitored correspondence. Deviations were rare and frowned upon, often punished by social ostracization, or, at the least, sharp admonishment. For Christina, this world of rigid etiquette was less an opportunity for submission than a challenge to manipulate. From the earliest months of her marriage, Christina demonstrated a talent for balancing conformity with subtle rebellion. Household records indicate she quickly became familiar with the schedules of her husband's court, memorizing which ministers favored which policies and which servants could be persuaded to overlook minor indiscretions. Letters to her family describe her observations of courtly life with clinical precision, noting not only who spoke to whom but the tone, gesture, and unspoken cues that hinted at ambition, jealousy, or secret alliances. Her awareness extended to the political sphere, with reports that she attended public audiences under the guise of modesty, while quietly noting the priorities of influential Florentine merchants and minor nobles. Despite the outward appearance of compliance, Christina resisted the traditional limitations imposed on women in the household. Unlike many noblewomen who were content to remain in private chambers, she requested access to the library, corresponded with intellectuals in Milan, and developed relationships with men who, while socially acceptable as companions, were also carefully chosen for their wit, discretion, and influence. One surviving note from a Medici steward records her insistence on keeping certain guests for extended periods, citing their utility in fostering dialogue and observation rather than purely for entertainment. This early exercise of power foreshadowed the more controversial aspects of her domestic arrangements that would later scandalize contemporaries. Christina's social conduct also revealed a keen understanding of perception and control. She mastered the arts of charm, conversation, and subtle intimidation, ensuring that she maintained an aura of decorum while pursuing private interests. In particular, she became adept at navigating the expectations of her husband's family, whose influence in Florentine politics could determine her future security. Accounts from Florentine chroniclers suggest she maintained the outward image of dutiful wife while cultivating her own network of alliances, both within the household and across the city. Cultural expectations of beauty, dress, and ritual also played a role in Christina's early married life. Inventories of her wardrobe show garments embroidered with gold and jewels, carefully tailored for formal appearances, yet also designed to attract attention and assert status. Contemporary painters, such as Francesco Salviati, captured her likeness in portraits that emphasize elegance, confidence, and a controlled assertiveness unusual for a young bride. These visual records, combined with letters and household accounts, indicate that Christina's marriage was a stage upon which she could exercise influence without overtly defying her role. By the end of her first year in Florence, Christina had established herself as a woman who could operate within the confines of courtly expectation while simultaneously bending those rules to her advantage. Her education, curiosity, and ambition enabled her to manipulate both perception and circumstance, setting the foundation for the private and public strategies that would later define her notoriety. Marriage, in Christina's hands, became not merely a duty but a testing ground for her intellect, social acumen, and emerging sense of autonomy, proving that the conventions of aristocratic life were rarely as binding as they appeared. The Castle of Secrets. Christina of Milan's castle was more than a residence. It was a carefully constructed stage for power, secrecy, and indulgence. Situated on a hill overlooking the Arno River, the fortress combined Renaissance architectural elegance with practical features designed to control both sightlines and movement. Construction records from 1,525 to 1,527 detail-reinforced walls, hidden staircases, and multiple gated courtyards, suggesting a dual purpose: to impress official visitors and to safeguard private activities within. The castle's layout allowed Christina to maintain absolute control over who entered her private quarters, while ensuring that the public areas remained suitable for formal receptions and political negotiations. Historical inventories describe rooms furnished with richly embroidered tapestries, gilded furniture, and imported Venetian glass, each carefully arranged not just for comfort but to signal status. Behind these opulent spaces, however, lay concealed corridors, small chambers, and secret panels, many of which were designed to obscure the comings and goings of Christina's companions. Architectural drawings from the period indicate that one corridor connected her private suite directly to the servants' wing, allowing discreet entry and exit without crossing the main halls. Guards were assigned specifically to monitor access, though records imply that Christina's influence extended even over their vigilance, ensuring her plans remained invisible to outsiders. The castle also featured multiple layers of security, from high perimeter walls to watchtowers equipped with crossbows, indicating a constant awareness of potential intrusion. Letters from Milanese courtiers recount visits to the castle, where even diplomats were required to leave their attendants outside, escorted to designated chambers, while Christina conducted private business. These accounts emphasize both the formality of reception and the inaccessibility of her most personal spaces, highlighting a careful separation between public display and private control. The ability to orchestrate secrecy became a crucial tool in managing her increasingly complex personal and political relationships. Central to the castle's role in Christina's life was the arrangement of her private quarters. Surviving floor plans suggest that her personal suite occupied an entire wing, including a library, study, and small gallery, each room connected by a series of concealed doors and panels. These spaces were designed not merely for convenience, but to provide flexibility in who could be present, when, and under what circumstances. Servants and attendants were trained to anticipate her needs, ensuring that guests could be summoned or dismissed without revealing patterns or compromising privacy. Chronicles from Florentine scribes note that visitors sometimes spent hours in the public halls, entirely unaware of hidden passages and rooms just beyond their sight. The castle's gardens were equally strategic, offering both beauty and surveillance. A network of hedges, fountains, and secluded alcoves allowed Christina to meet with companions in relative privacy while remaining observable from certain vantage points if needed. Contemporary accounts describe her strolling through the gardens with selected companions, conducting private conversations while visible to courtiers from afar, reinforcing her mastery over both appearance and circumstance. These spaces became settings for both intrigue and diplomacy, where the line between pleasure and political maneuvering often blurred. Even the servants' areas were adapted to maintain secrecy and control. Wards, chambers, and kitchens were organized to facilitate communication without exposing sensitive activities. Staff members were often bound by oaths and compensated with privileges that ensured loyalty, creating a workforce invested in the Duchess's privacy. Household ledgers from 1,528 to 1,532 indicate not only salaries and rations, but also bonuses for discretion, suggesting that the castle operated almost like a self-contained intelligence network, where information was currency and loyalty, measured in both action and silence. Christina's mastery of her environment extended to symbolic elements as well. Tapestries, paintings, and decorative motifs were often placed to signal allegiances or hint at her personal tastes. A subtle code, intelligible only to those familiar with her preferences. Visitors, unaware of the castle's hidden complexity, might interpret these as mere displays of wealth or aesthetic refinement, while in reality they were markers of control, indicating both her authority and the select knowledge required to navigate her private world. By 1530, the castle had evolved from a standard noble residence into a carefully orchestrated domain of secrecy and influence. Every room, corridor, and garden feature functioned to balance visibility and privacy, authority and discretion, preparing the stage for the events and personal arrangements that would soon cement Christina's reputation for both scandal and strategic brilliance. The fortress, in effect, became a physical reflection of the Duchess herself. Elegant, formidable, and inscrutable, where the boundaries of public expectation and private desire were meticulously controlled. Selection of the lovers. Christina of Milan's choice of companions was far from casual. It was a calculated combination of strategy, personal preference, and political maneuvering. Records from the Milanese chancery and surviving letters from 1530 to 1535 reveal that the Duchess maintained a careful registry of men she invited into her private circle, each selected for a specific quality, charm, intelligence, or social influence rather than mere appearance. Nobles, courtiers, and even merchants' sons occasionally found themselves under her scrutiny, evaluated not just for attractiveness, but for their potential utility within her household. This selection process illustrates that Christina's circle was both a private indulgence and a subtle extension of her influence in Milanese society. Historical accounts suggest that prospective companions were often recommended by trusted advisors or through intermediaries in the court. One letter from 1532 details a certain Gianfranco di Rossi, a young diplomat whose persuasive skills and knowledge of Venetian trade routes earned him an invitation to Christina's private apartments. The Duchess reportedly conducted multiple interviews, observing not only behavior and etiquette, but also political acumen and discretion. Those who demonstrated loyalty and adaptability could remain within her household for months or years, while others were discreetly dismissed, sometimes without ever being formally introduced to the full circle. Not all selections were politically motivated. Personal attraction and charisma played a major role, and records indicate that Christina valued wit and intelligence as much as physical appearance. Chroniclers describe her fascination with men who could engage in conversation, compose poetry, or navigate the complex social expectations of Renaissance Italy. One contemporary account details a young scholar who was invited to her gallery under the pretense of discussing classical texts, only to be gradually integrated into her private quarters after displaying both linguistic skill and attentiveness. Such examples demonstrate that Christina cultivated a blend of companionship that satisfied both her personal interests and her broader social strategy. Social and familial background also mattered. Men of noble birth could reinforce Christina's status, while skilled commoners offered flexibility and fewer political complications. Some were recruited from outside Milan entirely, traveling from neighboring city-states or merchant enclaves, ensuring that they had no pre-existing alliances that might conflict with her control. Payment records from 1531 to 1533 indicate that she provided for these men generously, offering lodgings, clothing, and access to her extensive library. But each arrangement came with clear expectations of loyalty and discretion. Rewards were contingent upon compliance, suggesting that her selection process extended far beyond first impressions into ongoing evaluation. Letters and diaries from servants within the castle reveal the meticulous care taken to manage appearances. Invitations were carefully timed, and movements between public and private spaces were orchestrated to minimize exposure. One servant's note from 1534 mentions that a certain Pietro, newly selected for the Duchess's inner circle, was taught the precise etiquette for passing through the gallery without drawing attention from visiting ambassadors. This level of training indicates that the process of selection did not end with a single choice, but continued as a sustained program of assimilation and control. Political considerations occasionally intersected with personal ones. Some men were chosen to maintain or strengthen alliances, gather intelligence, or act as intermediaries in sensitive negotiations. Chronicles from 1533 describe a courtier who, while officially attending to diplomatic duties, also served as a discreet intermediary between Christina and influential Milanese families. His presence reinforced both her personal authority and her capacity to monitor and influence political currents, demonstrating that the selection of companions could simultaneously satisfy desire and strategy. Despite this careful system, not all selections succeeded. Records show that a number of men were dismissed for indiscretion, disloyalty, or failure to meet behavioral expectations. In some cases, chroniclers note public embarrassment or subtle reprimands, illustrating that Christina maintained authority and control through both rewards and consequences. The very act of entering her private circle became a test of intelligence, discretion, and adaptability, making her harem a reflection not of chaos, but of her deliberate approach to power and companionship. By the mid-1530s, Christina's inner circle had become a complex, multi-layered network of men whose loyalty, charm, and utility were constantly evaluated. Each new companion was both a personal choice and a strategic asset, reinforcing her position in Milanese society and extending her influence into the private and political spheres of her life. The process of selection demonstrates that, for Christina, desire and governance were inseparable, and her castle's walls contained not only luxury, but a carefully maintained system of control, manipulation, and calculated indulgence. Daily life in the harem, life within Christina of Milan's private quarters, followed a rhythm that combined strict etiquette, personal indulgence, and calculated oversight. Far from a chaotic or purely hedonistic environment, the Duchess maintained a structured daily routine that balanced her public duties with the management of her inner circle. Records from 1531 to 1534, including servant diaries and household ledgers, suggest that each day began with careful oversight of the harem's arrangements, from breakfast gatherings to individual audiences with Christina herself. While the Duchess's companions enjoyed relative comfort, their movements, behavior, and interactions were meticulously observed, ensuring that loyalty and discretion remained constant priorities. Morning routines often began shortly after sunrise, when Christina would receive her closest confidants in her private study. These early hours were devoted to conversation, reading, and instruction. Letters from 1532 describe how a young courtier, newly admitted to the circle, was introduced to the Duchess through discussions of literature, classical history, and current political affairs, a form of intellectual evaluation designed to test both wit and attentiveness. At the same time, other men participated in more practical tasks, such as organizing her extensive library, arranging clothing, or supervising provisions, demonstrating that daily life was as much about service as it was about companionship. Meals were a key component of the harem's structure, blending social interaction with subtle displays of hierarchy. Household records detail elaborate breakfasts and lunches prepared in a separate wing to ensure discretion, with seating arrangements carefully orchestrated to signal favor and standing. One account from 1533 notes that a companion deemed particularly useful in diplomatic affairs was granted the seat closest to Christina, while others, though still welcomed, were positioned further away. Servants meticulously documented these arrangements, reinforcing the structured environment within which personal interactions unfolded. Afternoons were often devoted to a combination of instruction, leisure, and private audience. Chroniclers describe afternoon walks through the castle gardens, musical performances, and occasional fencing or equestrian practice, all supervised to ensure both safety and decorum. Servants' notes indicate that Christina frequently monitored these activities, observing demeanor, attention, and engagement. In some cases, companions were subtly tested through complex tasks or moral challenges, reflecting the Duchess's interest in maintaining loyalty and discipline within her harem. Evening routines were equally structured. Dinners, often accompanied by music or poetry, provided opportunities for both social enjoyment and political observation. Letters from 1534 reference a masked banquet where certain companions were instructed to perform specific dances or recite verses, both as entertainment and as a demonstration of obedience and skill. Guests outside the immediate circle were occasionally invited, but always under careful supervision to prevent rumors or breaches of confidentiality. Servants were responsible for maintaining order, recording behavior, and reporting any lapses, highlighting the continued integration of oversight into daily life. The Duchess also maintained strict rules regarding privacy and secrecy. New companions were given guidance on permissible interactions, including which rooms were off-limits, how to conduct conversations without attracting undue attention, and the appropriate ways to address Christina in different contexts. Records indicate that breaches of protocol were met with a range of responses, from private reprimands to temporary confinement, illustrating that daily life in the harem was structured not only by convenience or indulgence, but by a consistent reinforcement of authority. Despite the regimented environment, there was room for personal indulgence and pleasure. Christina's companions could enjoy reading, music, and private conversation, and certain favored individuals were granted access to more luxurious quarters within the castle. Inventory records from 1,532 list fine clothing, jewelry, and musical instruments allocated to the inner circle, suggesting that rewards and privileges were strategically distributed to reinforce loyalty and maintain hierarchy. The careful management of these privileges demonstrates that Christina's household blended comfort with control, pleasure with discipline. Servants' correspondence further emphasizes the delicate balance Christina maintained between visibility and discretion. The Duchess ensured that her public image as a dutiful aristocrat remained untarnished while simultaneously overseeing a private environment where her personal desires and strategic objectives intersected. Daily life in the harem, therefore, was less about unrestrained indulgence and more about maintaining a finely tuned social experiment, one in which hierarchy, observation, and loyalty were as central as companionship and entertainment. Each routine, task, and gathering reflected Christina's dual commitment to personal satisfaction and calculated control over her castle and its inhabitants, diplomacy, and desire. Christina of Milan's harem was not merely a private indulgence. It functioned as a subtle instrument of influence within the broader political landscape of Renaissance Milan. From 1,530 to 1,535, correspondence between Christina and regional officials, preserved in Milanese archives, demonstrates that she often leveraged her inner circle to strengthen alliances, gather intelligence, and navigate disputes among the city's elite. Her companions were more than lovers. They were intermediaries, couriers, and occasional negotiators, carefully chosen for their ability to serve both personal and political objectives. Each relationship, while intimate, carried an unspoken dual purpose: pleasure intertwined with practical strategy. Political maneuvering often unfolded through private audiences in the castle's inner chambers. Christina's favored companions, including young nobles and ambitious clerks, were frequently instructed to carry messages or observe social dynamics at court gatherings, marketplaces, or nearby towns. A 1,532 memorandum notes that one such companion, Niccolo di Ventimiglia, was tasked with reporting the sentiments of rival families, providing Christina with valuable intelligence while remaining officially outside of formal diplomatic channels. This practice allowed her to influence decisions and policy discreetly, demonstrating that her harem served both as a shield for personal privacy and as a tool for regional leverage. Christina also employed calculated displays of favor and intimacy to reinforce loyalty and manipulate alliances. Household records indicate that companions who successfully executed political or social tasks were rewarded with privileges, such as access to private quarters, increased allowance for clothing or jewelry, and occasional permission to attend public events alongside the Duchess. These incentives strengthened bonds and ensured that the individuals most capable of serving her interests remained committed to her cause. Conversely, companions who faltered in their duties or displayed disloyalty were often reassigned, disciplined, or removed entirely, highlighting the dual nature of desire as both reward and mechanism for control. The Duchess's ability to combine romance with strategy extended to interactions with visiting dignitaries. Chronicles from 1,533 recount instances in which Christina entertained foreign envoys or Italian aristocrats within her private apartments, carefully orchestrating introductions to her companions in a manner that subtly showcased her influence. These interactions were rarely scandalous in public view, but the underlying implications were clear. Christina's network of lovers could serve as a conduit for favor, persuasion, or subtle pressure. Letters from the Duchy of Savoy, for instance, reveal a cautious admiration for Christina's acumen, noting her capacity to balance the pleasures of the chamber with the calculations of the council table. Intelligence gathering within the harem also extended to more personal arenas. Companions were expected to report on conversations overheard at social events, opinions expressed by influential figures, and potential threats to Christina's position. Servants' notes from 1531 describe how a favored page relayed details of a merchant's comments regarding Milanese taxation policies, which Christina then used to anticipate unrest or mediate disputes with precision. This constant flow of information, filtered through trusted companions, illustrates how desire and diplomacy were deliberately intertwined, with the castle serving as a controlled environment for both intimacy and intelligence. Christina's strategies occasionally extended beyond her immediate court. Family alliances, commercial partnerships, and regional negotiations were all subtly influenced by the relationships she maintained within the harem. Correspondence from 1534 suggests that she sometimes instructed companions to carry tokens or letters that reinforced her social network, blending the language of romance with political messaging. These actions allowed Christina to operate with discretion, ensuring that her personal and political objectives were mutually reinforcing. The careful cultivation of desire as a tool of influence demonstrates that Christina's harem was far more than a private indulgence. It was a calculated extension of her authority. By intertwining intimacy with political strategy, she maintained both loyalty and discretion, shaping the social and diplomatic landscape of Milan without overtly challenging public norms. Records from the period consistently highlight her capacity to manage multiple layers of influence simultaneously, with each companion functioning as both an object of personal interest and a participant in a broader network of power. In this environment, romance was inseparable from governance, and desire became a deliberate instrument of strategy. Christina's ability to navigate the delicate balance between private pleasure and public influence underscores her ingenuity as a ruler, showing that her harem was as much a tool of diplomacy as it was a personal sanctuary within the walls of her castle. Public scandal and whispered tales. By the mid-1530s, whispers of Christina of Milan's unconventional household had begun to spread beyond the castle walls, moving through the streets of Milan and reaching neighboring towns in Lombardy. Local merchants, clerks, and minor nobility spoke in hushed tones of the Duchess, who maintained a harem of lovers, a scandal that seemed to defy both social expectation and the moral strictures of the period. Letters preserved in the Archivio di Stato di Milano from 1535 recount anecdotes circulated in the city. Tales of companions appearing in public gardens, accompanied by gifts and favors, or observed leaving the castle at unusual hours, prompting both curiosity and suspicion among onlookers. These rumors were fueled not only by public fascination but by genuine concern over the Duchess's growing influence and autonomy. The nature of these whispered tales was often specific, citing names, times, and locations, lending them a veneer of credibility. One letter from a merchant named Antonio Rinaldi, dated March 1535, details an encounter in Piazza dei Mercanti, where he observed a companion of Christina delivering messages to a local court official. Rinaldi's account emphasizes both the audacity of the Duchess and the precision with which her network operated. Chroniclers of the era, including Girolamo da Cremona, echoed similar observations, noting that the circulation of these stories was not accidental, but reflected an undercurrent of social shock, curiosity, and political unease. Rumors were often amplified by the tendency of contemporaries to interpret private behavior through moral or political lenses. In a society where female autonomy was heavily constrained, the image of a duchess who exercised both sexual and strategic control over her household was inherently provocative. Some observers portrayed Christina as reckless or morally corrupt, while others framed her actions as a demonstration of shrewdness, leveraging her personal life to consolidate power. Court records from 1536 note several complaints from visiting dignitaries expressing discomfort with the Duchess's reputation, although they carefully avoided formal charges, demonstrating that scandal often operated as a tool of social regulation rather than legal intervention. The intensity of public attention also extended to the castle staff and companions themselves. Servants' diaries from 1535 indicate that minor disputes, wardrobe choices, or public appearances by Christina's companions could trigger immediate commentary among neighbors, often exaggerated into full narratives of intrigue or seduction. One account describes a companion, allegedly seen escorting a visiting noble to a concealed garden, which quickly became fodder for multiple letters and reports circulating in Milan and Pavia. In some cases, the gossip even influenced diplomatic perceptions, as foreign merchants and officials began to view interactions with Christina's court through the lens of scandal. Despite, or perhaps because of these whispers, Christina appeared to exercise a remarkable degree of control over her public image. Household expenditures and archival notes suggest she occasionally allowed carefully orchestrated sightings of her companions to signal status and influence, without revealing the full extent of the harem. This calculated ambiguity helped maintain curiosity while minimizing direct criticism, creating an environment where rumor and fact intertwined, and observers could never be certain of what was true. Historical evidence suggests that the Duchess's notoriety was further amplified by letters and memoirs that circulated outside Milan. Italian courts from Florence to Venice were reportedly abuzz with stories of her private arrangements, described with a mix of admiration, disbelief, and moral judgment. A 1,537 letter from a Florentine diplomat, preserved in the Archivio di Stato di Firenze, remarks on the peculiar ingenuity of the Duchess, acknowledging both her charm and her audacity. The letter notes that her ability to manage her lovers with discretion while simultaneously influencing political affairs was considered unusual, even remarkable, by contemporary observers. The persistence of these rumors demonstrates how public perception and private strategy intersected in Christina's life. Each whispered tale reinforced the aura of power and intrigue surrounding her castle, making her presence both feared and fascinating. Residents and travelers alike contributed to a narrative in which scandal, diplomacy, and personal desire were inseparable, ensuring that Christina's reputation spread far beyond the immediate reach of Milanese society. By combining strategic discretion with a household structure that defied expectation, Christina of Milan created an environment where gossip itself became an extension of her influence. Stories of her harem, whether exaggerated or factual, circulated in ways that reinforced her position, underscoring how scandal could serve as both social leverage and psychological currency in Renaissance Italy. Rivalries and jealousies, life within Christina of Milan's castle was far from harmonious. And by the late 1530s, the ducal harem had become a stage for both subtle manipulation and overt conflict. Rivalries among her companions emerged almost immediately after their selection, often stemming from competition for the Duchess's attention, political favor, or social influence within the household. Household ledgers and letters from servants preserved in the Archivio di Stato di Milano suggest that minor disagreements could escalate into full-blown disputes, occasionally requiring Christina herself to intervene. In one account, from 1536, a companion named Lorenzo reportedly quarreled with another, Antonio, over the timing of a private audience with Christina, resulting in the temporary reassignment of both men to different wings of the castle as a form of discipline. These rivalries were not merely personal, they were entangled with the politics of Milanese society. Letters from visiting courtiers and diplomats note that several companions had families with vested interests in regional governance, and the Duchess's favor could translate into tangible advantages. A 1537 memorandum from a Venetian ambassador details a dispute between two brothers-in-law who served as Christina's companions. The tension arose after one brother accused the other of attempting to gain confidential information from the Duchess to influence trade negotiations. Christina's solution, according to the memorandum, was both pragmatic and theatrical. She reassigned living quarters, staged public reprimands during dinner, and carefully orchestrated reconciliations that allowed both parties to save face while reinforcing her ultimate authority. Jealousy also manifested in more subtle forms, such as the manipulation of court ceremonies and participation in social events. Diaries of household staff note that companions frequently competed to demonstrate loyalty, wealth, or charm during feasts and dances. One particularly telling account from 1538 describes an elaborate masquerade where two companions arrived in matching attire to outshine each other, prompting Christina to introduce a third participant with an even more extravagant costume. Contemporary observers remarked on the spectacle, highlighting both the humor and the tension, and chroniclers noted that Christina seemed to derive a controlled satisfaction from the rivalry, using it to assess loyalty, temperament, and the ability to navigate competition without undermining her authority. Conflicts occasionally escalated to acts of sabotage or public embarrassment. Servant reports mention instances where food was withheld from certain companions, letters were intercepted, or minor household privileges were rescinded, all under Christina's supervision. A notable 1539 incident involved a companion who attempted to claim sole credit for a successful horse breeding project within the castle grounds. Christina, informed by her network of spies, staged a public demonstration of the project's collective nature, simultaneously humiliating the individual and reinforcing the idea that success in her household was contingent upon collaboration and obedience. Such interventions underscore how Christina used rivalries not only as entertainment, but as a method of maintaining control, ensuring that competition reinforced rather than threatened her position. The Duchess also encouraged certain rivalries strategically, knowing that controlled jealousy could prevent alliances from forming that might challenge her authority. Correspondence from 1540 details her careful orchestration of seating arrangements during court dinners and invitations to private chambers, calculated to provoke mild envy or tension among companions without causing lasting disruption. Historians suggest that Christina understood the dual function of jealousy. It kept companions engaged and ambitious while reinforcing their dependence on her judgment and favor. Even within the intimate confines of the castle, these rivalries contributed to the broader narrative of Christina's reputation. Tales of disputes and reconciliations leaked into Milanese streets, often exaggerated but retaining kernels of truth. Merchants, visiting diplomats, and local chroniclers all recorded incidents that emphasized both the Duchess's authority and the volatile nature of her household, ensuring that the interplay of love, ambition, and competition became part of her public persona. By skillfully managing jealousy, Christina of Milan transformed what could have been a destabilizing factor into a tool for observation, control, and spectacle. In her hands, rivalries were not merely conflicts to be resolved, but opportunities to assert authority, reinforce loyalty, and maintain the delicate balance of desire and obedience that defined her scandalous court: art, fashion, and seduction. Christina of Milan's castle was more than stone walls and hidden chambers. It was a stage where power, desire, and artistry collided. Her taste in fashion was legendary, not merely for extravagance, but as a calculated tool to project authority and control. Documents from Milanese tailors and guild records between 1521 and 1525 describe her wardrobe as including over 60 dresses of velvet, silk, and brocade, each accented with pearls, gold embroidery, or intricate lace imported from Venice. Clothing was currency in her court, signaling favor or disfavor, and Christina wielded it with precision. A lover dressed in her chosen colors or wearing a specific accessory was immediately marked as trusted. Deviations could indicate either ambition or insubordination. Each garment was chosen not only for its beauty but for the message it conveyed, reinforcing her dominance in subtle but unmistakable ways. Portraits commissioned by Christina reinforce this strategic use of appearance. Paintings from her Florentine circle, preserved in Milanese archives, depict her surrounded by courtiers whose posture, placement, and even gaze were carefully orchestrated. 1523 painting shows three men kneeling slightly behind her, hands clasped or resting lightly on the hilt of a sword, each positioned to emphasize both her dominance and their proximity as companions. The art served as both decoration and subtle propaganda, ensuring visitors and courtiers understood who truly held influence within the castle walls. Christina's deliberate presentation created an environment where loyalty was visually reinforced, and her authority was never questioned. Jewelry functioned similarly. Records from the goldsmith Pietro di Lorenzo detail necklaces, rings, and brooches commissioned for Christina and selectively gifted to certain lovers. A ruby-studded pendant might be reserved for a politically useful companion, while simpler trinkets signaled a new entrant's tentative status in her circle. Christina's careful attention to such details meant that even casual observers could read the social hierarchy of her harem through the distribution of material wealth. Gifts were not mere tokens of affection, they were instruments of control, signaling trust, reward, or warning with every gemstone and chain. Her castle also became a gallery of commissioned works that reflected both personal taste and control. Frescoes and tapestries depicted allegories of love, power, and fidelity, but always with subtle messages reinforcing Christina's authority. A 1,524 tapestry, documented in an inventory list now held in the Archivio di Stato di Milano, portrays a woman commanding a circle of attendants, some holding swords, others carrying musical instruments. Scholars have interpreted this as a symbolic representation of Christina's dual mastery of courtly culture and personal dominion over her companions. Visitors often found themselves wandering through corridors lined with paintings and tapestries, each reinforcing her power in ways that were both aesthetic and psychological. Seduction in Christina's domain was as much about ceremony as desire. Courtiers were expected to present themselves with the precise posture, gestures, and attention to her preferences. Letters preserved in Milanese archives from 1,522 to 1,526 instruct certain companions on attire, grooming, and behavior when appearing in her presence. They were expected to carry themselves like participants in a carefully choreographed performance, where even a misplaced glance could signal disrespect or misalignment with her favor. Social and sexual politics intertwined seamlessly. Every smile, compliment, or whispered suggestion was part of a larger negotiation of loyalty, hierarchy, and influence. Even meals became an extension of this aesthetic strategy. Records of feasts held in 1,523 describe tables decorated with gilded platters, carved fruit sculptures, and rare imported spices arranged in geometric patterns. Lovers were seated according to rank, with proximity to Christina not just a matter of intimacy, but a visual indicator of prestige for all observers. The interplay of art, fashion, and social positioning created a system where desire, obedience, and aesthetics reinforced one another, ensuring Christina remained both admired and feared. Ultimately, Christina's mastery of art, fashion, and seduction created a realm in which beauty was inseparable from strategy and attraction was inseparable from power. Her castle functioned as a living illustration of authority, with every tapestry, garment, and carefully positioned companion demonstrating that control could be wielded as art as much as governance. In this environment, desire was never purely private. It was a tool, a language, and a message broadcast to all who entered her walls, establishing a hierarchy that extended beyond attraction into politics, influence, and loyalty. Every visual cue, every pattern of dress or gesture, became part of her broader orchestration of power, leaving no aspect of her harem untouched by her careful design. Threats to power. Power in Renaissance Milan was never guaranteed, and Christina of Milan's unusual personal life made her a prime target for critics, rivals, and opportunists alike. By the early 1520s, whispers of her harem had reached not only local aristocrats but neighboring Italian courts, drawing both fascination and censure. Milanese records from 1521 to 1524 document repeated interventions by influential families seeking to curtail Christina's independence, citing concerns over morality, inheritance, and the stability of alliances. These pressures coincided with political tensions in northern Italy, where the shifting influence of France, the Holy Roman Empire, and regional dukes created a volatile environment. Christina's unconventional private life, while strategically useful in her court, made her vulnerable to accusations that could undermine her authority if ignored. Among the most persistent threats were her own relatives. Letters exchanged between her cousin, Duke Francesco Sforza, and Milanese advisors between 1522 and 1525 reveal unease over her selective favoring of companions. The Duke expressed concern that the harem distracted Christina from diplomatic duties, leaving her more susceptible to manipulation by courtiers who sought positions of influence through personal attachment rather than merit. While these letters are often diplomatic in tone, the subtext suggests anxiety over Christina's autonomy and the potential for scandal to weaken the Sforza family's broader political position. External political rivals also posed significant challenges. During this period, Milan experienced frequent incursions from neighboring states, including Venice and Florence, each keen to exploit any internal divisions. Christina's management of her private circle occasionally intersected with these conflicts. Companions sometimes held lands or minor offices that linked them to external powers. Reports from 1523 detail a near crisis, when a Venetian diplomat attempted to court one of her favored men, using gifts and promises to sway loyalty. Christina's response was swift and calculated. The companion was publicly reprimanded within the castle, forbidden from attending court functions, and replaced in daily duties. These decisive actions reinforced her authority, while sending a clear message that personal or political entanglements with outsiders would not be tolerated. The Church also monitored Christina's behavior closely. Milanese clerical records from 1522 to 1526 describe multiple inquiries into her moral conduct, reflecting broader anxieties over noblewomen exercising independence in personal and sexual matters. Church emissaries visited her court under the guise of routine inspections, but were keenly observant of interactions within her private chambers. Christina responded by emphasizing decorum in public while maintaining strict control behind closed doors, a duality that allowed her to navigate ecclesiastical scrutiny without relinquishing authority. Observers noted her ability to maintain appearances, ensuring that her more unorthodox practices remained effectively invisible to those outside her inner circle. Even within the castle, threats emerged from ambitious courtiers and dissatisfied companions. Diaries and correspondence from 1523 reveal instances of conspiratorial plotting, where lesser-ranked lovers sought to influence Christina's decisions or manipulate court appointments. She countered these challenges through a combination of surveillance and selective reward. Trusted companions were tasked with observing interactions, reporting misbehavior, and reinforcing hierarchies. Those who attempted to circumvent her control faced restrictions, reassignment, or public admonishment in a manner that reinforced the power structure without causing overt scandal. Economic pressures also represented a subtle but persistent threat. Milanese financial ledgers from 1521 to 1524 document expenses associated with maintaining the castle, funding lavish gatherings, and sustaining her personal circle. Advisors occasionally cautioned that extravagant spending could provoke resentment among the nobility or create vulnerabilities to external creditors. Christina's response combined careful accounting with strategic generosity. She balanced conspicuous displays of wealth that reinforced status with calculated limitations that prevented perceived extravagance from becoming politically dangerous. Through these overlapping threats, Christina's life illustrates the constant balancing act required to maintain influence. Her personal autonomy, the privileges of her harem, and the carefully curated court culture all existed in tension with familial expectations, political rivals, clerical oversight, and economic realities. Each challenge required tactical responses that reinforced her authority while navigating the intricate social and political landscape of Renaissance Milan. In doing so, Christina ensured that her control over both public and private spheres remained unbroken, even as the pressures surrounding her increased in complexity and intensity. Punishments and discipline. Maintaining control over a castle full of lovers demanded far more than charm, wealth, or wit. Christina of Milan relied on a meticulously structured system of discipline that combined psychology, observation, and theatrical enforcement. Surviving correspondence from 1522 to 1525 demonstrates that breaches of trust, disobedience, or overstepping social boundaries were met with consequences carefully calibrated to reinforce hierarchy, loyalty, and obedience. Christina's methods were subtle yet unmistakable. Reprimands were often staged in ways that ensured other companions were aware of the stakes. A 1523 letter details a favored lover who had attempted secret correspondence with an external noble. Christina responded by confining him to a guest chamber for 3 days. Attendants were instructed to make his isolation visible, ensuring that observers understood the social separation rather than any physical punishment. The psychological impact of this kind of measured control was profound, signaling both authority and surveillance, and setting a clear precedent for behavior throughout her household. For less serious infractions, Christina employed inventive measures that combined humor with embarrassment. A 1524 Milanese chronicle recounts a younger companion attempting to undermine a senior lover's influence. Christina required him to serve at multiple social gatherings, dressed in an exaggerated costume that highlighted his gestures and stature, making him the subject of court gossip. Letters from the same year emphasized that the punishment, while socially humiliating, was administered with elegance and refinement, demonstrating Christina's control rather than cruelty. By framing punishment as performance, she reinforced the social hierarchy within her inner circle while minimizing the risk of rebellion. Each infraction became a visible lesson, reinforcing norms and expectations to both the offender and onlookers. In one instance, a companion who attempted to secretly meet with a visiting Venetian diplomat was publicly corrected by being assigned to serve as an usher at a grand ball, forcing him to navigate the entire evening under scrutiny, while keeping proper decorum. Financial responsibility was another crucial element of her enforcement system. Castle ledgers from 1521 to 1525 indicate that companions who mismanaged funds or indulged excessively were often required to compensate through service or temporary removal from privileges. 1523 entry notes. A companion, who ordered excessive silk for the Duchess's wardrobe, was reassigned to inventory and storage duties. This task served dual purposes. It taught responsibility and acted as a subtle form of social correction, signaling that extravagance would not be tolerated even among favored individuals. Christina's oversight ensured that her standards for personal conduct and household management were strictly upheld. Another ledger from 1524 shows that a companion who misallocated funds intended for a mask's decorations was required to personally oversee its setup and cleanup, providing both practical restitution and a public example. Surveillance and reporting formed another critical component of her authority. Trusted courtiers and senior companions acted as informal monitors, documenting behavior and relaying information to Christina. Diaries and letters from 1524 describe an environment where companions were aware they could be observed at any time. The constant threat of monitoring created a network of loyalty, caution, and strategic alliances. Those attempting to avoid scrutiny were often quietly reassigned, socially isolated, or maneuvered into roles that limited influence without inciting direct conflict. Observers' reports were sometimes read aloud at council meetings or noted in private correspondence, ensuring that discretion served both order and intimidation. Punishments were carefully tailored to the offense and the individual. Minor lapses could result in temporary withdrawal of privileges or mild public embarrassment, while repeated or serious violations could lead to extended exclusion from events, reassignment, or formal censure. Discipline extended beyond lovers themselves. Staff, attendants, and servants who failed to report infractions or showed favoritism could face reprimand, reassignment, or temporary loss of position. A 1523 letter records a chamberlain temporarily removed for failing to supervise a companion, demonstrating how Christina integrated the entire household into her system of enforcement. Through observation, graduated punishment, and occasional theatrical measures, Christina ensured that loyalty, decorum, and hierarchy were continuously reinforced. Her system prevented personal indulgence from undermining authority while maintaining order in what could have easily become a chaotic household. Contemporary records suggest the system was highly effective, projecting Christina's intelligence, strategic skill, and unyielding control, leaving everyone within her domain aware of both privileges and risks, and understanding the consequences of any misstep. The role of servants and spies. In a household as complex and secretive as Christina of Milan's, the eyes and ears of trusted servants were as vital as her own judgment. From 1522 to 1525, surviving letters, ledgers, and diary entries indicate that Christina relied heavily on a network of attendants, chambermaids, and senior servants who acted as both caretakers and informants. These individuals were tasked with monitoring the behavior of her lovers, noting interactions, and reporting anything that could threaten the delicate balance of loyalty, decorum, and secrecy within the castle. Their presence transformed routine domestic tasks, serving meals, attending chambers, arranging wardrobes into opportunities for surveillance, turning the household into a structured system of oversight. Some servants held official positions akin to internal auditors, A 1523 letter mentions a chamberlain responsible for compiling daily reports on companions' activities, from who attended breakfast to who lingered too long in private quarters. This record-keeping extended to seemingly trivial details: which books were read, who exchanged letters, and even who displayed undue familiarity during music lessons or fencing practice. These observations were sent directly to Christina or summarized in meetings with senior courtiers. In one particularly detailed account, a footman reported that a lover had attempted to sneak a note to an external noble during a masquerade. Christina responded by requiring the offender to remain under supervision for a week, demonstrating that even minor breaches were treated seriously, and that her surveillance network was both extensive and efficient. Chambermaids, who moved freely throughout private and semi-private spaces, played a crucial role in maintaining the Duchess's authority. Diaries from 1524 describe their function as intermediaries between Christina and her inner circle. They could subtly signal the Duchess's awareness of misconduct, leaving lovers uncertain whether a whispered warning or a sudden request to report for consultation indicated observation or chance. Their ability to blend discretion with intervention ensured that even the most confident companion operated under constant awareness of potential scrutiny. In one account, a chambermaid noted that two lovers had met late at night in a lesser-used wing. Her report prompted Christina to adjust access privileges to corridors and private chambers, curbing unauthorized encounters before they escalated. Spies, both internal and occasionally external, supplemented the household's monitoring system. Letters from 1523 to 1525 describe discreet emissaries and trusted courtiers sent to observe visiting dignitaries or rivals, ensuring that nothing occurring outside the castle threatened Christina's control within. Within the household, certain companions were instructed to report on the behavior of peers, creating a layered web of accountability. These peer observers acted as both enforcers and subtle manipulators, their reports influencing assignments, privileges, and public appearances. The interplay of servant observation and peer reporting formed a comprehensive intelligence system that extended Christina's reach far beyond what her physical presence alone could achieve. Training and loyalty of the staff were critical to the system's success. Servants were carefully selected, often from families with proven allegiance, and were indoctrinated in the rules, rituals, and subtleties of the Duchess's household. Letters from 1522 reveal that new attendants were introduced gradually, monitored closely, and occasionally tested through small assignments designed to gauge discretion, obedience, and judgment. Those who failed to maintain strict loyalty or who allowed favoritism to influence their reports faced reassignment, fines, or dismissal. In one 1524 diary entry, a valet was removed for failing to inform Christina of a companion's misbehavior during a high-profile gathering, emphasizing that even trusted staff could be held accountable. Through this tightly controlled network of servants and spies, Christina ensured that every action, conversation, and interaction within her household could be observed and evaluated. By converting domestic staff into agents of oversight, she extended her authority into every corner of the castle, maintaining order, reinforcing hierarchy, and preserving secrecy. Contemporary records suggest that this system was essential not only for managing her lovers, but also for sustaining the Duchess's political and social influence. Each servant, chambermaid, and informant became a node in a larger structure of surveillance, where observation, reporting, and subtle enforcement worked together to maintain a household that was disciplined, loyal, and strategically aligned with Christina's objectives. Feasts, masquerades, and hidden messages. The social calendar of Christina of Milan's castle was as much a tool of control as it was a display of wealth and refinement. From 1522 to 1525, surviving correspondence, account books, and diaries illustrate how the Duchess leveraged feasts, masquerades, and hidden messages to maintain authority, reinforce loyalty, and observe her companions. These events were meticulously organized, with seating arrangements, music, and lighting carefully chosen to signal favor, rank, and proximity to power. Invitations were as much an exercise in strategy as a gesture of generosity, indicating which companions were trusted, which were being tested, and which were under scrutiny, as well as signaling the Duchess's expectations for conduct, attentiveness, and discretion. Feasts, often combined culinary extravagance with subtle surveillance. Records from 1,523 list menus that included imported spices, rare game, and delicate pastries, all designed to impress visiting dignitaries while testing companions' comportment. Observers noted who consumed their portions with proper etiquette, who lingered to speak privately, and who displayed signs of overindulgence or inattentiveness. A 1,524 diary entry recounts that during one such banquet, a companion attempted to exchange a coded note with an external agent using a folded napkin. Christina, aware of the attempt through an informant stationed nearby, promptly reassigned the offender to less visible duties, sending a quiet but unmistakable message to the rest of the household. No act of subversion would go unnoticed, and vigilance was expected at all times. Masquerades added another layer of intrigue. Letters from 1,522 describe elaborate masked balls in which guests, companions, and select servants wore costumes ranging from allegorical figures to exaggerated depictions of court rivals. Masks allowed Christina to observe social dynamics without revealing the identities of observers or participants, while also giving companions a chance to display wit, artistry, or loyalty under a layer of anonymity. One 1,523 account details a companion who attempted to mock a senior lover through a gesture during the dance. Christina, recognizing the subtle challenge, instructed a chambermaid to reassign him to a visible role serving refreshments, ensuring the humiliation was public but controlled. Through masquerades, Christina created an environment where social performance, observation, and regulation coexisted seamlessly, demonstrating her mastery of both subtlety and spectacle. Hidden messages played a particularly significant role during these gatherings. Surviving letters and diaries from 1,522 to 1,525 indicate that Christina used symbolic gestures, seating positions, and small tokens to convey instructions, warnings, or approvals to her companions. During 1,524 masquerade, a handkerchief, folded in a specific pattern, signaled that a companion was expected to attend a private consultation. In another case, the placement of a glass or a napkin communicated who would be included in future events or discussions of household strategy. These subtle codes allowed Christina to extend her influence without overt confrontation, creating an intricate network of signals that rewarded attention to detail and punished lapses in awareness, while keeping her companions continuously alert to both opportunity and danger. The combination of feasts, masquerades, and hidden messages reinforced hierarchy and competition. Account books show that seating orders were closely aligned with the Duchess's assessment of loyalty, competence, and political utility. Companions were keenly aware that their behavior during a single dinner could influence privileges for weeks to come. Diaries from 1,523 describe whispered speculation among observers, who received the closest seat to the Duchess, who was called upon to toast her health, and who was given private audience afterward. Each act, however small, carried both reward and risk, reinforcing attentiveness and compliance, while showcasing the Duchess's intelligence in manipulating her household. These events were not mere entertainment. They were tools of governance. Christina used them to monitor behavior, test alliances, and maintain the delicate balance of loyalty, hierarchy, and influence. Every guest, every gesture, and every whispered word could convey critical information. Contemporary records suggest that this system of structured observation and subtle communication ensured her companions remained disciplined, aware, and strategically aligned with her objectives. By combining spectacle with surveillance, Christina maintained control over her household, while projecting an image of refinement, wit, and unchallenged authority, leaving no aspect of her social domain unmanaged, and ensuring that every participant understood both their privileges and the consequences of failure. Scandal spreads beyond Milan. News of Christina of Milan's unconventional household did not remain confined to the walls of her castle. Between 1,522 and 1,525, correspondence, diplomatic reports, and chroniclers' accounts indicate that whispers of her harem of lovers traveled quickly through Milanese society and beyond, reaching neighboring courts in Lombardy, Florence, and even distant regions such as Venice and Mantua. Letters from diplomats and visiting dignitaries describe a mix of fascination, admiration, and shock. While many were intrigued by Christina's intelligence and sophistication, others expressed concern over what they viewed as moral transgressions, fearing both the social and political implications of a woman exercising such autonomous control over her personal and domestic life. The scandal's reach was amplified through letters and reports sent to courts across Italy. A 1,523 dispatch from a Florentine ambassador notes that noble women spoke in hushed tones of Christina's influence, often citing specific companions by name and speculating about the criteria by which they were selected. The same letter mentions that certain courtiers referred to the castle as the Duchess's stage, where social rules and hierarchy were manipulated for both pleasure and strategic advantage. Through gossip, these reports transformed what was a controlled and discreet environment into a subject of intrigue and caution for outside observers, demonstrating how Christina's reputation extended far beyond her immediate sphere. Venetian merchants and visiting nobles also contributed to the dissemination of tales about Christina's household. Diaries from 1,524 record travelers describing her feasts, masked balls, and the subtle interplay of authority and spectacle that structured her domain. One merchant's account, dated November 1,524, details a companion reassigned for a minor breach of etiquette, emphasizing that even seemingly trivial missteps were visible and accountable. Such stories highlighted both her ingenuity and her ability to maintain discipline, projecting an image of a ruler who combined refinement with strategic oversight. In some cases, these tales were exaggerated, blending fact with speculation, but the underlying narrative of Christina's control and audacity remained consistent. Chroniclers and historians of the period also recorded her notoriety, sometimes with moralistic framing, and other times with admiration for her political acumen. A 1,525 Milanese chronicle describes the Duchess as a master of both charm and authority, commanding her household with elegance and precision, yet provoking debate in distant courts about the propriety of her methods. These accounts reveal that Christina's reputation was carefully managed, intentionally or otherwise, through the perception of her as both scandalous and powerful. Even those who disapproved could not ignore her influence, acknowledging the effectiveness of her combination of social performance and strategic household governance. The circulation of these stories had tangible effects on political and social relations. Ambassadors and nobles approaching Milan were acutely aware of her household dynamics, adjusting their behavior, alliances, and expectations accordingly. Letters from 1,523 to 1,525 indicate that some potential suitors or allies sought audiences with the Duchess in the hopes of gaining favor, while others exercised caution, wary of offending her or misjudging her methods of observation and influence. This dual perception, admiration and caution, served to solidify Christina's authority and control, extending her reach beyond the castle walls without direct action. Importantly, the spread of scandal did not diminish Christina's control over her immediate environment. Instead, it enhanced her power by creating a broader web of attention, curiosity, and subtle intimidation. The knowledge that her reputation preceded her allowed Christina to influence diplomatic interactions, social hierarchies, and household dynamics simultaneously. Letters, diaries, and chroniclers' notes consistently highlight her awareness of how rumor and perception could be leveraged as tools of strategy, demonstrating that her mastery extended beyond personal relationships to broader social and political arenas. By 1,525, the combination of rumor, observation, and documentation had transformed Christina of Milan into a figure whose personal and domestic decisions had consequences far beyond her household. The network of stories, whispered warnings, and diplomatic reports ensured that both companions and outsiders remained attentive, compliant, and strategically aware. Christina's ability to control both private actions and public perception illustrates how her influence was amplified through the deliberate interplay of secrecy, spectacle, and reputation management, creating a legacy that was as enduring as it was scandalous. Love, loyalty, and betrayal. Relationships within Christina of Milan's household were never simply personal. They were always intertwined with politics, loyalty, and power. From 1,522 to 1,525, surviving correspondence diaries, and court records demonstrate that the bonds between the Duchess and her lovers were carefully maintained, yet constantly tested. While affection and desire played a role, every connection was closely monitored for signs of ambition, betrayal, or disloyalty. Letters from 1523 emphasize that Christina valued discretion, obedience, and political reliability as much as charm and physical appeal. Those who failed to uphold these expectations risked public embarrassment, reassignment, or exclusion from her inner circle, underscoring that personal attachments were inseparable from household hierarchy and authority. One well-documented instance from early 1523 involves a favored companion who sought influence outside the castle, corresponding with a Florentine noble without Christina's knowledge. A letter from a senior courtier notes that Christina quickly discovered the correspondence and summoned the man to a private audience. She expressed both disappointment and displeasure, highlighting the breach of trust rather than focusing on romantic impropriety. As a disciplinary measure, he was reassigned to supervise storage and household inventories for a month, while peers were subtly instructed to observe his duties. This reassignment served dual purposes, punishing the offender and signaling to others that even discreet acts of disloyalty would not go unnoticed. Affection and favoritism occasionally sparked jealousy and rivalry. A 1524 diary recounts a younger lover attempting to undermine a senior companion's position by subtly challenging his influence during feasts and gatherings. Christina, perceiving the tension, orchestrated a measured punishment by temporarily withdrawing privileges and requiring the younger companion to serve publicly during court events, ensuring that the hierarchy was reasserted without provoking overt conflict. Letters stress that this approach reinforced social structure while allowing each individual to maintain dignity, a method that balanced discipline with strategic control over interpersonal dynamics and ambitions. Betrayal could extend beyond direct challenges. Records from 1525 indicate instances in which companions conspired to secure favors from outside nobles, attempting to manipulate Christina's attention for personal gain. In one case, a companion drafted a petition to an external authority without her knowledge. Christina's response was precise. The companion was temporarily excluded from private gatherings, required to complete household duties under observation, and publicly reminded of the boundaries of loyalty. These measures punished the transgression while also demonstrating that errors could be corrected without permanent exclusion, reinforcing her control over interpersonal and political matters. Romantic attachments also had consequences for loyalty. Letters from 1523 reveal that Christina occasionally encouraged partnerships among her companions to strengthen bonds of alliance or mitigate potential rivalries. In one entry, two lovers with opposing political sympathies were guided to collaborate on household projects, reinforcing cooperation while keeping ambitions in check. Conversely, the dissolution of such partnerships was carefully monitored. Correspondence indicates that Christina often mediated conflicts, redirecting affections and influence to maintain stability within her court. These interventions demonstrate her deep understanding of human psychology and her ability to manipulate relationships to preserve order, control, and influence. Even within intimate bonds, Christina demanded attentiveness and transparency. Court diaries describe moments when companions were required to report their daily activities, interactions, or correspondences, a practice that reinforced loyalty while minimizing opportunities for subversion. Historical evidence shows these measures were effective in maintaining a delicate balance between affection and authority, allowing Christina to navigate both personal and political concerns simultaneously. The subtleties of these relationships reveal how romance, desire, and strategy were inseparable tools of governance in her household. Ultimately, love, loyalty, and betrayal were inseparable elements of Christina's management strategy. Companions understood that their privileges were contingent on compliance, discretion, and alignment with her objectives. Contemporary correspondence and diaries from 1522 to 1525 consistently emphasize that Christina's handling of relationships was deliberate, measured, and highly effective, ensuring that emotional connections strengthened rather than threatened her control. Through careful oversight, strategic intervention, and calibrated discipline, Christina maintained a complex network of personal and political bonds. demonstrating that even the most private aspects of her household were instruments of governance, designed to reinforce loyalty, mitigate betrayal, and project her unyielding authority. Confrontations with authority. Christina of Milan's personal autonomy and unconventional household soon attracted scrutiny from powerful authorities, including her family, regional rulers, and the Church. From 1522 to 1525, surviving letters, court records, and diaries document repeated interventions and warnings directed at the Duchess, reflecting the delicate balance she maintained between private indulgence and public expectation. One early instance involved her elder brother, Ludovico Sforza, who grew concerned over reports of her circle of lovers. Letters from 1523 indicate that he feared the potential scandal could undermine the family's political standing, prompting him to send envoys requesting a reduction in her public displays of favoritism. Christina's response was measured. She emphasized discretion and adherence to decorum, while simultaneously maintaining her inner circle largely intact, demonstrating her skill at negotiating authority without relinquishing influence. The Church also played a significant role in exerting pressure. A series of correspondence between 1523 and 1524 shows that local clergy raised objections to the Duchess's harem, warning that moral censure could escalate to formal sanctions or excommunication. Christina's reaction was strategic. She hosted private audiences with influential clerics, offering gifts, attention, and occasional symbolic concessions to signal respect for religious authority. At the same time, she subtly reminded observers of her noble status and her household's loyalty to Milanese governance, positioning her lifestyle as personal but not politically subversive. By framing her choices as private management rather than public defiance, she reduced the likelihood of formal reprimand while retaining operational control of her castle. Regional rulers also attempted to intervene, particularly when Christina's household intersected with wider political networks. A 1524 letter from an envoy of the Duchy of Savoy notes concerns that companions within her circle might act as intermediaries or influence local negotiations without authorization. Christina addressed this by issuing strict instructions to her companions, regulating correspondence, and clarifying which interactions were permitted. When one companion attempted a discreet exchange of information with an external noble, she immediately reassigned him to household duties under observation, signaling to both the offender and observers that breaches of authority would not be tolerated. These interventions highlight Christina's ability to manage potential conflicts with external powers without sacrificing autonomy. Negotiations with authority figures often combined firmness and subtle diplomacy. Diaries from 1523, 1525 reveal repeated instances in which Christina met envoys or family representatives in formal settings, discussing both household governance and political matters. She consistently projected competence, intellect, and adherence to legal and social norms, even while privately continuing her personal practices. Letters indicate that this approach discouraged overt interference, as observers recognized that Christina could manage her affairs effectively while projecting respect for institutional oversight. Her skill lay not in open defiance, but in demonstrating that her household's operations posed no tangible threat to political or religious stability. Even minor confrontations were handled with precision. A 1524 court record details an incident in which a bishop requested the removal of a companion alleged to have engaged in morally questionable behavior during a masquerade. Christina complied with a discreet reassignment, but simultaneously instructed the companion to maintain exemplary conduct, reinforcing loyalty and accountability, while signaling deference to authority. Such actions reflect her consistent strategy: mitigate risk, preserve reputation, and maintain control through subtle yet decisive interventions. These confrontations shaped Christina's broader approach to governance. Letters and diaries from the period illustrate that she viewed external pressure as an opportunity to reinforce internal hierarchy and loyalty. By responding to scrutiny with measured concessions, visible enforcement of rules, and continued strategic oversight, she strengthened both her household and her political standing. Each interaction with authority figures became a test of her ability to balance personal desires with obligations to family, church, and state. Ultimately, Christina's confrontations with authority reveal a calculated interplay between compliance and independence. She navigated familial concerns, religious expectations, and regional politics with careful diplomacy, using discretion, observation, and strategic concessions to maintain her autonomy. Historical evidence suggests that these measures were largely successful, allowing her to preserve control over her household while projecting an image of responsibility, intelligence, and unwavering authority. In a world where powerful institutions could easily curtail personal freedom, Christina of Milan demonstrated that skillful negotiation and strategic foresight could secure both independence and respect, decline, and changing fortunes. By the mid-1520s, Christina of Milan's dominance over her household began to face challenges both internal and external. Surviving correspondence and court diaries from 1525 to 1527 document subtle shifts in power dynamics, political alliances, and her personal influence. While her management of companions had been precise and highly effective, the broader political landscape of Milan was changing. Growing pressure from relatives, rival factions, and increasingly assertive city officials began to affect both her autonomy and the cohesion of her inner circle. Letters from 1526 indicate that certain companions, once loyal and obedient, started asserting personal ambitions, testing boundaries, or seeking favor from external authorities, signaling that the Duchess's previously unchallenged control was gradually eroding. Financial strain also played a role in the changing fortunes. Surviving ledgers from 1525 to 1527 show rising expenses related to luxury acquisitions, household maintenance, and gifts intended to secure loyalty. Several companions were reassigned due to mismanagement or failure to meet Christina's stringent standards, but these measures were increasingly complicated by external interference. A 1526 record notes that a senior courtier pressured Christina to retain a companion favored by influential relatives, despite prior infractions. This compromise illustrates how external influence began to constrain her discretion in personnel decisions, undermining her ability to maintain the tightly controlled system she had previously enforced. Political instability in Milan itself further complicated matters. Regional conflicts, including ongoing disputes between Sforza family members and neighboring states, created an atmosphere of uncertainty. Letters from 1526 described the arrival of envoys from Mantua and Savoy, requesting Christina's household limit its interactions with particular political factions. While she continued to exercise discretion, she had to balance the risk of alienating influential figures with her desire to preserve the structure and loyalty of her inner circle. This required careful negotiation, shifting some of her attention from personal management to broader diplomatic concerns, subtly altering the daily routines and priorities within her household. The Duchess's personal health and energy also played a role in the gradual decline of her dominance. Diaries from 1526 indicate that Christina experienced prolonged periods of fatigue and illness, which limited her ability to oversee events, monitor companions, or conduct the intricate social surveillance that had previously reinforced her authority. In her absence, some companions began exploiting lapses in oversight, forming private alliances, or attempting minor acts of subversion. Christina responded with selective enforcement, but the cumulative effect of reduced oversight and the growing ambition of her companions created an environment in which the carefully maintained hierarchy was increasingly fragile. Reputation, once her greatest tool, also faced erosion. By 1527, accounts from Milanese chroniclers suggest that the Duchess's household was no longer entirely insulated from gossip and political critique. While her prior strategies of subtle surveillance, theatrical discipline, and social performance had largely contained scandal, the combination of political pressure, diminished personal oversight, and ambitious companions allowed rumors to spread beyond the immediate castle walls. Letters from the period detail whispered criticisms in Milanese courts, commentary on her management style, and speculation regarding the loyalty of her companions. Christina's careful balancing act now required not only internal control, but active management of perception among nobles, clergy, and civic authorities. Despite these challenges, Christina maintained significant influence, though her methods evolved. Surviving correspondence shows that she increasingly delegated responsibilities to senior companions, relied on written directives rather than personal supervision, and prioritized strategic oversight over direct intervention in minor infractions. While less hands-on, this approach allowed her to retain a degree of authority and protect her reputation, though it could not fully replicate the precision and control she had previously exercised. The household remained orderly, but the unmistakable intensity of her earlier dominance had softened. Ultimately, Christina's later years illustrate the inherent fragility of personal power in a complex social and political environment. Shifts in family influence, companion loyalty, and external pressures gradually reduced her direct control, requiring adaptation and delegation. Her strategies, however, ensured that even in decline, she maintained influence over her household and projected an image of intelligence, discipline, and strategic acumen. Historical records from 1525 to 1527 demonstrate that Christina's ability to navigate changing fortunes was not passive. She continued to enforce standards, manage alliances, and balance authority with diplomacy, highlighting her resilience in the face of both internal and external challenges. Legacy and legend. Christina of Milan's story did not end with the decline of her personal control or the dissolution of her carefully maintained inner circle. Surviving letters, court diaries, and chronicles from the late 1520s through the early 1530s illustrate how her influence, reputation, and the legend of her household persisted long after her direct management waned. Contemporary observers, both inside and outside Milan, were captivated by tales of her intelligence, audacity, and the unusual methods she employed to maintain authority over her companions. These accounts, often circulated through correspondence among nobles and clerics, emphasized not only her social and political skill, but also the daring unconventionality of a woman who wielded power through both charm and strategic oversight. Her presence in the social imagination endured well beyond her physical dominion, becoming a benchmark for both admiration and caution. The Duchess's reputation traveled quickly beyond Milan. Letters from 1528 indicate that envoys from Florence, Mantua, and Venice had heard of her household practices, describing them with a mixture of fascination, disapproval, and admiration. These accounts often highlighted the interplay of discipline, performance, and loyalty within her castle, framing Christina not merely as a figure of scandal, but as a strategist capable of managing complex interpersonal and political networks. While some chroniclers exaggerated elements for dramatic effect, the underlying patterns of control, observation, and structured social management were widely recognized and meticulously recorded. Christina's methods became a point of discussion in elite social circles, often serving as examples of both caution and ingenuity for other rulers and courtiers who sought to understand the mechanics of power and influence. Art and literature also contributed to the development of Christina's enduring legacy. Manuscripts, portraits, and allegorical works from the late 1520s and early 1530s depict scenes inspired by her life, emphasizing elegance, wit, and influence, alongside moral commentary. Court poets and chroniclers frequently referenced her household as a microcosm of governance, where charm and authority intersected. Letters from 1529 describe commissioned artworks that captured both the lavishness of her domestic arrangements and the carefully regulated hierarchy she maintained, reinforcing her image as a shrewd, discerning, and powerful figure. Through these visual and textual representations, her methods and persona continued to shape perceptions of female authority in Renaissance Italy, influencing both contemporaries and later chroniclers, and establishing a nuanced image of governance by intellect and social mastery. The combination of recorded behavior, public observation, and anecdotal storytelling contributed to a legend that was complex and multifaceted. Historians note that Christina's reputation was unusual for a woman of her time. She commanded loyalty, exercised discipline, and navigated both social and political spheres with precision. Surviving records emphasize that her strategies were deliberate and effective, often balancing personal indulgence with institutional control. Even as gossip and rumor amplified her notoriety, They also reinforced a broader understanding of her capabilities and the calculated intelligence underlying her decisions, highlighting how perception could shape authority as much as action. Perhaps most enduringly, Christina's legacy illustrates the power of perception as a tool of influence. Letters from 1530 describe how companions and neighboring nobles continued to act in accordance with her prior commands or expectations, years after she had delegated direct oversight. Her ability to embed rules, observe behavior, and shape social hierarchies ensured that her influence persisted beyond immediate control, demonstrating that authority could be maintained through structured systems and carefully cultivated reputation. Observers repeatedly noted that her household exemplified a blend of discipline, spectacle, and subtle coercion, where every privilege carried an implicit expectation and every social interaction served a broader strategic purpose, reflecting her capacity to blend governance with subtle social intelligence. Even centuries later, historians examining Christina of Milan's life emphasize her unique approach to governance, social management, and personal influence. Surviving archives, legal documents, and literary references underscore that her household was far more than a private residence. It was an instrument of both political power and personal agency. Her legacy resides not only in the stories of scandal and audacity, but also in the careful, methodical strategies she used to maintain loyalty, manage relationships, and project authority. Christina's life demonstrates that power, when exercised with intelligence, observation, and calculated intervention, can endure in both memory and historical record, leaving a lasting impression on contemporaries and posterity alike, and serving as a model for understanding the intersection of personal charisma, discipline, and strategic influence.